Will you pray with me? Gracious God, may the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts be acceptable to you, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Why does Jesus ask so many questions? Why does he answer so few? And why is it so often with another question? And what does it mean for our faith that the questions outnumber the answers? What does it tell us about God that Jesus seems to prefer a hard question to a certain answer? And is this sermon going to be nothing but questions? Fear not. Here comes a declarative statement. Most of us are uncomfortable with questions. Driving up the New Jersey Turnpike a couple of years ago, I saw a billboard with a giant picture of a Bible with the words, "Got questions? We've got the answer," and the address of a church just below it. It certainly caught my attention, and I bet it was a pretty effective ad campaign for that church. For many people I talk to tell me they come to church looking for answers, and it's no wonder. Life is uncertain, confusing, and full of mysteries, and we long for a place that will relieve life's tension and give us the answers we seek. And church seems like a very good place for that. But I have to confess, that hasn't always been my experience, and maybe it hasn't always been yours. More often than not, when I read the Bible or listen to a sermon or especially write a sermon, I end up with more questions, ones I hadn't even thought of. But take heart. I think that's the point. Faith is not a quest for answers, or it wouldn't be called faith. It would be called certainty. Faith is an invitation to trust in that wisdom that is found in uncertainty, to trust that God will meet us in the questions more often than in our answers. But that requires a mind shift for many of us, especially for traditional Christians. I once heard a rabbi explain one of the differences between Judaism and Christianity this way. When Christians read a passage in the Bible, they often close the book and say, "That's the answer. End of discussion." When Jews read a passage in the Bible, they say, "I wonder what that means. Let's get the conversation started." And I know that's painting with a broad brush, but there's a lot of truth to that. And it reminds me that Jesus, the founder of our faith, was a very good Jew. For he asked a lot of questions. The gospel records 307, to be precise. And of the 183 questions that people asked of him, he only answers 8, and most of them with another question. So it's clear that for Jesus, it's the questions that really matter. So with all these examples of Jesus' questioning, we might ask why our faith fixates so much on the answers. Franciscan priest Richard Rohr offers this thought: answers give us more of a feeling of success and closure. Easy answers instead of hard questions allow us to try and change others instead of allowing God to change us. I think of the ways that some folks throw the scriptures at one another to make their point, as if quoting chapter and verse is proof that they are right, when all it usually does is shut down the conversation. But to live the questions, as the poet Maria Rilke says, asks us to release our need to know and instead be open to possibilities we cannot yet imagine. This fall, we are kicking off our time together with a special sermon series exploring some of the questions of Jesus. And like all good questions, these will have layers and contradictions and may take us in directions we didn't expect. And they will most likely provoke more questions. Kind of like the labyrinth that's at the center of our sanctuary. These questions will be a path that twists and turns, and sometimes we'll feel like we're moving ahead, like we're making progress, and other times we feel like we are going backwards. But the reality of both the labyrinth and our faith questions is that they always move us to the heart of God. On the way, we'll learn that curiosity and skepticism, doubt and delight are all part of the same journey. For if Jesus wanted us to have all the answers, he wouldn't have asked so darn many questions. So asking questions is what we are called to do. But here's a question about questions. Are all questions equal? Think about it for a minute. For those of you with kids in school, especially teenagers, especially teenage boys, I offer this scenario from my own experience. Your 15-year-old comes home from school, drops his backpack on the floor, and opens the refrigerator door. Hoping to engage him in conversation, you ask, "How was school?" What's the most likely answer you'll get? Maybe fine, or a barely articulated okay, if you get an answer at all. But what would happen if you asked the question this way? What was the best part of your day today? Or what did you talk about in English class? You might get a different kind of answer. Those are questions that open up conversation, questions that invites greater depth, questions that can lead to a greater relationship. And the same goes with the questions we ask of God. It matters how we ask them. This morning, we're beginning with one of Jesus' questions that feels perfect for a Welcome Back Sunday. What are you looking for? Many of us are back here after a good long summer break away, and we enjoyed a change of routine that took us to different places on a Sunday morning. But by the looks of things, many of us have chosen to come back here, to reconnect this Sunday and to be a part of this community once again. What brought you back? What are you looking for? Our gospel story from John centers on this question. And it's interesting to note that it's the very first question Jesus asks in the whole Gospel of John. And it sets the theme for everything else that is to come. Here, Jesus is practically still wet from his baptism when he realizes that a couple of John the Baptist's disciples are following him. So he turns and he asks them, "What are you looking for?" Another translation has it, "What do you need?" It's a good, open-ended question. And it's a provocative one for us, too. For no matter how we might describe our faith journey, each of us has essentially followed Jesus into this building this morning. We might not describe it that way, but something about his life, his story, his experience, his promise, his challenge has drawn us here. Maybe we hardly know anything about him and we want to learn more. Maybe we've been following him for years and we know that we have to stay close and hear the stories and share the teachings in order to keep ourselves on track. Maybe we feel a void in our lives and we hope that our shared experiences here in this community will help us to fill it. Or maybe we simply have no idea why we are here or what we are looking for. But here we are. The thing about a really good question is that there is never just one right answer, only honest ones. And sometimes the most honest answer that will take us farthest down the road is, "I don't know." I think that's the answer that the disciples give Jesus this morning. For when Jesus asks them what they are looking for, they really have no answer. It's too soon for certainty. They are only just catching a glimpse of this intriguing man, and they aren't sure who he is or what he's about or what he could mean for them, but they know that they are drawn to him. And maybe that's enough for now. If Jesus were to ask you that question, "What are you looking for?" how would you respond? What motivates or inspires or challenges you to follow Jesus or to be a part of this place or to live your faith out in the world. Years ago, in an era when claiming a Christian identity and being in church was pretty conventional and pretty normal, these kinds of questions were asked less often. You were in church because your culture expected you to be. You were Christian because your family was. But we live in a time when many folks resist religious labels and membership in institutions, and yet still hunger deeply for spiritual connection. And so these questions are essential. As Socrates said, an unexamined life is not worth living. And so it is also true that an unexamined faith cannot feed our soul. And Jesus doesn't want us to phone in our faith or simply repeat the answers that our parents or the tradition gave us. He doesn't want us to open our Bibles to end the questions, but to start them. He wants us to explore the questions for ourselves and be willing to live in the tension of the search, which might be the hardest part of all. Theologian Audrey West observes that as John's gospel story moves on, we quickly learn that there are other people besides the two disciples who are looking for Jesus, and for very different reasons. Later on, we learn that the crowds are seeking to have their bellies filled, maybe with a little more bread, while the religious authorities are seeking to kill him. One group seeks life, and the other death. But these two disciples, for their part, want something different than either the crowds or the authorities. And like contestants on Jeopardy, they answer Jesus' question with one of their own. He asks, "What are you looking for?" And they answer, "Where are you staying?" What could that mean? Maybe it means, "Where can I find you?" But I don't think they're asking for the location of Jesus' tent or for the guest house where he may be lodging. For that word that translates in English to staying means so much more in the Greek, the language of the Gospels. It means abiding, dwelling, enduring. So the disciples want to know where Jesus lives, where Jesus dwells, what he roots himself in. They want to find Jesus' enduring home, which we come to learn, and they do too, as we get to know him, is the heart of God. And so maybe the disciples' cryptic question is the best answer for us as well, at least for now. For if we are looking for a faith that hands us the answers, if we want to turn to Jesus as the answer man, we will be disappointed. But we might find hope in the advice offered by the poet in the modern lesson this morning. Be patient with regard to all that is unresolved in your heart, and try to love the questions for themselves. Don't search for the answers which could not be given to you now because you could not live them. And the point is to live everything. So live the questions now, and perhaps someday, far into the future, you will gradually, without even noticing it, live your way into the answer. What are you looking for? The question itself is enough. And if we are open, we may find it draws us to seek in the places where Jesus dwells, where the heart of God can be found. And that, I believe, is wherever good questions are being asked and good questions are being lived. May the God who planted these questions in our hearts be with us on the journey. Amen.